The first thing you should understand about a beacon is that it does not care whether anyone is watching it. That is its whole virtue. A beacon is a promise made to the dark, and a promise is not lessened by going unheard. I told myself this for a very long time. I told it to the empty corridors of the Tethan station, to the cold plating under my feet, to the slow amber pulse of the light I tended, and near the end to no one at all, because there was no longer anyone left on that station to tell it to accept me, and I had heard it too many times to be comforted. My name is Orenval. I am of the Vareth, and if you do not know us, know this much: we are a slow people. Our hearts beat perhaps a third as fast as a human heart. We breathe long and low. We live, when we are lucky, close to 300 of your years, and we do not measure our lives in the quick, bright bursts that shorter-lived peoples do. A Vareth can sit with a single thought for a season. A Vareth can wait. We are built from the fur out to wait. Which is, I suppose, why the Austral Compact gave the beacon keepers post to my kind so often. We did not go mad in the quiet the way others did. We did not count the days and let the count crush us. We could hold a lantern up to the void for a lifetime and call it a fair trade for a warm berth and a purpose. I was young, young for a Vareth, which is to say I had already lived longer than most humans ever will, when they posted me to the Tethan beacon on the Cadric Drift. I remember thinking it was a good post, busy. The Cadric was a working lane then, or haulers, grain barges, the long, slow caravans of the inner combines. I would see 100 ships in a season, and each one of them would ping the beacon as it passed, a small electronic courtesy, a nod between the traveler and the one who keeps the light. We see you. Thank you for the light. I want you to hold that in your mind, the busyness of it, because you cannot understand the silence that came after unless you first understand that there had once been sound. The Cadric Drift died the way most things die out here, slowly and then all at once, and for reasons that had nothing to do with the people it left stranded. A new lane was surveyed 2 systems coreward, straighter and faster, and the combines took it. The haulers followed the combines. The grain barges followed the haulers. The compact, which existed to make money and had never pretended otherwise, looked at the ledger for the Cadric route and saw a column of red, and 1/4 they simply stopped funding it. There was no announcement. There is never an announcement for a thing like that. There was only a resupply ship that did not come when it was due, and then did not come the quarter after, and then a terse transmission. The last live transmission I would receive from the compact for the rest of my working life, informing the keepers of the Cadric that the route was under review and that we should maintain our posts pending reassignment. I maintained my post. I'm still maintaining it in the way that matters. The reassignment never came. There were 4 of us on the Cadric when the route was live. Keepers, I mean, 4 beacons strung along the drift like lamps along a country road, and a keeper on each. I knew the others by voice over the long band. Celoran on the far beacon, who sang badly and whom I loved for it. Old Hesh, who had kept his light longer than I'd been alive and who spoke about the void the way a farmer speaks about weather, with respect and no fear. And the young one, Ivetsar, on the beacon nearest mine, who was too clever for the post and knew it and chafed. Ivet went first. When the resupply stopped, she waited 2/4 and then she did the sensible thing, the thing a clever person does. She rigged her keeper's skiff for a long burn, set her beacon to run automatic, and made for the coreward lane on her own reserves. I helped her plan the burn over the long band. I checked her arithmetic. Her arithmetic was good. The skiff was not. I never learned exactly where it failed her. There was a transmission, some weeks into her burn, that I have tried for 90 years not to remember and have never once succeeded in forgetting. And then there was not. That is the thing about the sensible choice out here. Sometimes the arithmetic is good and the ship is not, and the void does not care about the difference. Hesh died in his post, which is the death he would have chosen. He was very old. One long band cycle he did not answer, and the next he did not answer, and I understood. His beacon ran automatic for a while on its own reserves, a light with no one behind it, and then its reserves failed and it went dark, and the drift had one fewer lamp. Celoran lasted the longest of the others. We spoke every cycle for, I want to say, 40 years, though the years blur. She sang to me over the long band, still badly, and I found I no longer minded the badness, that the badness was in fact the entire point, that a perfect voice would have consoled me less. And then her reactor began to fail, the way mine is failing now, and there was nothing either of us could do about it across the light towers between us but talk, and so we talked. I was on the long band with her at the end. She was not afraid. She told me the light on her beacon was still lit, and I told her mine was still lit, and she said, "Good then, that's good," and her voice thinned out the way a signal thins when the power behind it fails, and then the long band gave me back nothing but the hiss of the drift itself. After that I was alone. That was, by the station's own reckoning, 61 years ago. I had already been on the Tethan beacon for the better part of 30, 90 years near enough that I have kept this light, 60 of them with no living voice within 100 light towers. I tell you all of this not to make you grieve for me. I have done enough grieving for the both of us, and I am, in the main, past it. I tell you so that you will understand what it meant later, when the dark broke. A person can live alone for 60 years. I am proof of it. But a person cannot live alone for 60 years without becoming strange, and I will not pretend I did not become strange. The Vareth are solitary by nature. Yes, we do not crowd and chatter the way some peoples do, but there is a difference between solitude and abandonment, and it is the difference between choosing to close a door and having the last door in the universe closed against you. The strangeness took the form mostly of talking. I talked to the station. I named its systems and scolded them when they failed and thanked them when they held. I talked to the beacon itself, up in its housing, the great slow amber pulse of it, and I told it the news, though there was never any news. And in the 40th year of my solitude, or thereabouts, I did a thing I have never told anyone, because for a long time there was no one to tell, and because it embarrasses me a little even now. I built a friend. I do not mean I built a machine, though of course that is what it was. I mean that I took the guts of a failed maintenance drone, one of 3 the station had carried, all of them dead by then of the same slow rot that kills everything out here, and I rebuilt it out of the parts of the other 2, and I gave it a voice box salvaged from a dead comm panel and a set of optical sensors that did not quite match, so that it seemed always to be looking at you a little askance, as though skeptical, and I taught it over years. A few hundred phrases and the routines to say them at something like the right moments. It was not clever. I want to be honest. It was not a person, and I always knew it was not a person. Its conversation was a loop of the things I had taught it, and the things I had taught it were, in the end, only the echoes of my own voice. I called it Seth. It is a Vareth word, an old one, for the small lamp a traveler carries when the great lamps are too far apart. A hand light, a little light you keep close. Seth trundled after me on its 3 unmatched wheels for 20 years. It said good cycle to me when I woke, and it said the reactor was holding when the reactor was holding, and it said, in its flat salvaged voice, keep the light, Oren, when I set out on my rounds because I had taught it to, because I had wanted, very badly at the age of 200 and some, for one thing in the universe to tell me to keep the light. It was foolish. I know it was foolish. I built a mirror and taught it to reassure me, and then let it reassure me. But I will tell you that on the worst cycles, the cycles when the grief of the others came back on me all at once, the sound of that flat, patient, unmatched-eyed little machine saying keep the light, Oren was the difference between a keeper and a corpse, and I have long since stopped being ashamed of anything that kept me a keeper. So, that was my life. A dying station on a dead route, a slow old man of a slow old people, and a friend I had built out of the wreckage to keep the friend-shaped hole in me from swallowing the rest. And every single cycle, without fail, for 90 years, I kept the beacon lit, and I logged the distress. The distress is the part I need you to understand most of all, because it is the part that saved me, and it is the part I had least faith in. A compact beacon carries a standing distress protocol. If the route it serves ever goes dark, if the keeper judges the station to be failing, or in need, or simply forgotten, the protocol says, broadcast. Broadcast your identity, your position, your condition on the standing distress band and keep broadcasting, so that any ship of any registry passing within range will know that here, at these coordinates, there is a keeper who requires relief. I began broadcasting the distress in the second year of my solitude, when it became clear the resupply was never coming. I have broadcast it every cycle since. 90 years of the same signal, thrown out into a dark that no longer had any ships in it to hear. I want to be precise about the state of my faith in this because I think it matters. I did not believe anyone would answer. Let me be plainer than that. I knew, with the certainty of a man who has watched 3 friends die in the same silence, that no one would answer. The route was dead. The compact had struck it from every chart it owned. No ship had passed within range of the Tethan beacon in 60 years, and no ship would, because there was no longer any reason for a ship to be within 100 light hours of me. The distress signal was not a call for help. It had stopped being a call for help decades before. It had become, simply, a thing a keeper does, the way you might leave a candle in a window for a traveler who you know in your heart is never coming home. You do not leave the candle because you believe. You leave it because leaving it is who you are, and because the day you stop is the day you admit the traveler is gone, and you are not ready, and you will never be ready, and so the candle stays lit. The candle stayed lit. The distress went out, and I grew old and older in a way that even a Varith eventually grows old, and the reactor that fed the beacon and the station and me began, at last, to die. I knew the shape of it because I had heard it happen to Celoran across the long band. The fluctuations first, then the fluctuations closer together, then the long, slow browning of the lights, the systems shutting themselves down one by one to feed the ones that could not be spared. I had perhaps a season left. 2, if I was frugal, and I have never in my life been anything but frugal. I did the sensible arithmetic. I, who had checked Ivitsar's arithmetic 90 years before and watched the void ignore it. And the sensible arithmetic said that the beacon and I would go dark together, quietly, sometime in the next 2 seasons, and that no one would ever know, and that this was simply the way of the Cadric drift, which had swallowed every other lamp along its length and would swallow the last. I made my peace with it. I am a Varith. We are built to make peace with long, inevitable things. And then in the last of my seasons, with the lights browning around me and Seth's flat voice grown slow, because I was rationing even its small power, a ship heard the candle in the window. I will tell you how it happened from my side, because my side is the only side I can truly tell, though I have since learned enough of the other side to fill in the shape of it. I was in the beacon housing when the proximity register woke. I had not heard the proximity register wake in 60 years. I want you to understand what a strange thing it is to hear a sound you have not heard in 60 years. A sound you have, without ever deciding to, filed away under the category of sounds that belong to the dead time, sounds from before the silence. It is not like remembering. It is like a ghost walking through a wall. The register gave its small ascending chime, the chime that means a mass is approaching on an intercept vector, and I stood in the beacon housing with a diagnostic wand in my hand, and I did not move, because my mind had rejected the sound as impossible before my body could respond to it. Then it chimed again. I went to the panel the way you go toward a thing you are afraid to find is not real, slowly, ready to have it taken from me. And on the panel, on the old cracked display that I had not seen show anything but the drift's own emptiness in 6 decades, there was a contact, a single contact. A mass on an approach vector, decelerating. Decelerating, which meant it was not merely passing, which meant it meant to come here, and squawking a registry I did not recognize, in a protocol I did not recognize, a protocol younger than my solitude. I did not know then what humans were. I had heard the word long ago in the days when the long band still carried gossip from the inner systems. A new people, someone had said, come up out of a backwater. Trouble, someone else had said, or promise, I no longer remember which. They had not been anything to me. In 90 years no human had ever been anything to me. I did not know their ships or their manner or their reputation, such as it was. I knew only that the contact on my panel was real, and that it was slowing, and that it was aimed with the unmistakable geometry of intention at the coordinates I had been broadcasting into the dark for 90 years. Someone had heard the candle. I did a foolish thing then. I have thought about it since, and I cannot defend it, and I would do it again. I did not answer the hail, there was no hail yet, and I did not run to the comm to identify myself. I went instead to the great viewport on the station's spine, the one I had stopped looking out of years before because there was never anything to see, and I pressed my hands against the cold plex, and I looked for the ship with my own eyes. For a long time there was nothing but the drift, the dim, unlit dust of a dead lane, and then, very far out, a light that was not the drift and was not a star, a moving light, growing. The engine glow of a real ship, decelerating, its drive throwing a soft banked haze against the dust, and behind it the long lit line of a hull catching what little light there was. And I stood at the plex with my hands pressed flat, and I made a sound I had not made in 90 years. A sound I did not have a name for, that was not quite grief and not quite joy, but was made of the same stuff as both. And Seth came trundling up behind me on its 3 unmatched wheels, slow on its ration power, and looked with its mismatched eyes at the same thing I was looking at, and said, in its flat and patient voice, the thing I had taught it to say. Keep the light, Oren. I have wondered since whether I imagined how apt it was. I do not think I imagined it. I think a machine that only ever says the few things you taught it will, now and then, across enough years, say exactly the right one, the way a stopped clock is right, and I think that is not less of a gift for being an accident. I kept the light. I did the thing a keeper does. I went to the comm, my hands were not steady. I am not ashamed of that either, and I opened the standing distress band, the same band I had broadcast into for 90 years, and for the first time in 90 years I broadcast to a listener instead of to the dark. I gave my identity. Orenval Keeper, the Tethan Beacon, the Cadric Drift, Austral Compact Registry, though I doubted the compact still existed in any form that would recognize the name. I gave my condition: reactor failing, reserves critical, 1 keeper aboard, and I hesitated, and then I said it, and 1 keeper aboard, because I could not think how to explain Seth and did not want to explain Seth, not yet, not to strangers. And then I waited, and the waiting was the longest of my life, longer than the 90 years, because the 90 years had been waiting for nothing, and this was waiting for something. And that is a different and far crueler kind of waiting. The reply, when it came, was in a voice I had never heard the like of. Later I would learn to hear the humans as themselves, to catch the warmth and the weather in their speech. In that first moment I heard only that it was a living voice, a real voice, close, not thinned by light towers, not a recording, not Seth's salvaged loop, but a person speaking to me, and it undid something in me that 90 years had wound very tight. The voice said its ship was the Survey Tender Wren, out of a human registry I did not know, off its charted lane on a long-range survey, and that it had picked up my distress on a band its comms officer had not expected to find anything on at all. The voice said they were coming in to dock. And then the voice, and I did not understand that first moment, why it mattered so much that the voice did this. Though I understand it now, the voice paused, and asked me a question that no protocol requires, that no efficiency demands, that a purely competent rescue would have skipped entirely. The voice asked me how long I had been out here. I could not answer at first. It is a simple question, and I could not answer it. I stood at the comm with the word 90 in my mouth and could not push it out, because to say the number aloud to a living person was to make the number real in a way it had never quite been real when I only said it to Seth in the dark. I said it eventually. I said, 90 years, near enough. And I heard, over the open band, before the voice remembered the channel was still live. A second voice somewhere behind the first say a soft word I did not know, and I did not need to know it to understand it, because the thing under it was the same in any language. It was the sound a decent person makes when they have just understood something they wish they had not. The wren came in and docked at the Tethan Beacon 11 cycles after Celoran's song had gone out of the long band forever, if you count the way I count, which is to say 61 years and some cycles after I had last touched a living hand. I met them at the lock. I had put on my keeper's coat, the good one, the one I had not worn since there had been anyone to wear it for, and it hung off me because I had grown thin in the rationing years, and I stood at the inner lock with Seth at my heel and my heart going as fast as a Vareth heart goes, which is not fast, but which felt that cycle like a drum. There were 3 of them in the first party. I have their names still, of course. I will have their names until the reactor of my own body fails, and after that I do not know where names go, but if they go anywhere, I will take these 3 with me. The captain was a woman named Ada Sorley. She was not large, as I had half expected the makers of monsters to be. The word for humans out among the older peoples was already, even then, tangled up with the word for something to be feared, and I had absorbed it without noticing. She was small and gray at the temples, and she moved like a person who had made a great many decisions in her life, and did not waste motion on the ones that did not matter. She came through the lock first, which I would later learn was not standard, that a captain does not usually take point through an unknown lock, and I would learn that she had done it precisely because it was an unknown lock and she would not send her people through a door she would not go through herself. She stopped a respectful distance from me, and she did not reach for me, and she did not fill the silence with noise. She let me look at her. She understood, somehow, without being told, that I had not seen a living face in a very long time, and that I would need a moment to believe in hers. Behind her was the comms officer, the one who had heard me, a young man named Neve Calloway, though everyone called him only Neve, and he was the one, I would learn, who had been listening to a band he had no reason to listen to, out of the kind of restless curiosity that the young have and that had, in this one instance, out of all the instances in which such curiosity comes to nothing, reached across 90 years and found a keeper. Neve could not stop looking at me. He was not rude about it. He was simply young, and I was the strangest and oldest thing he had ever encountered, and he looked at me the way I imagine I had once looked at my first working lane, full of a thing too large to be polite about. And behind them both, hanging back, wiping her hands on a cloth out of a habit her hands had and her mind had not authorized, was the engineer. Her name was Ree. She was looking, I noticed, not at me at all, but past me, at the browning lights of my corridor and the labored sound of my failing air handlers, and I saw her face do a small tightening thing, and I understood that she was a person who heard a dying machine the way I heard it, as a kind of pain, and that she was already in the first 10 seconds, cataloging everything that was wrong with my station, and disliking all of it very much. It was Ada Sorley who spoke first. She said my name, she had it from the distress log, and she said it correctly, the Vareth way, with the small catch on the second syllable that most peoples cannot manage, and I learned later she had asked Neve to teach her the sound of it in the 11 cycles of their approach, so that the first thing I heard from a living mouth in 60 years would be my own name, said right. I did not know that then. I know it now. I have had 90 years of solitude and only a little while of the other thing, and I have spent a great deal of that little while turning over small acts like that one, the way you turn a warm stone in a cold hand. She said my name, and she said that she was sorry it had taken so long for anyone to come. I want to tell you that I answered her with dignity. I am a keeper. I had held a lamp up to the void for 90 years. There should have been dignity in me somewhere. What I did was weep. The Vareth do not weep as humans do, our eyes do not spill, but there is a sound we make, low in the chest, a kind of rolling hum that our mothers make over us when we are small and that we make after that perhaps 3 or 4 times in a 300-year life, at the very largest hinges of it. I made it at the lock of my dying station in front of 3 strangers of a people I had been taught to fear, and none of the 3 of them looked away, and none of them hurried me, and the young one, Neve, made a small helpless motion with his hand as though he wanted to reach out and did not know if he was allowed, and the captain saw it and gave him the smallest nod, and he crossed the space between us and put his human hand on my Varith's shoulder, on the coat that hung off me, and left it there, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say, and he had the grace, young as he was, not to say it anyway. That is the moment, if you want to know, when I stopped being able to think of them as anything but what they were. Not monsters, not the makers of anything to be feared, simply the people who came. I have gone over since what a purely sensible rescue would have looked like, because I think you cannot understand what the humans did unless you first understand what they did not have to do. A sensible rescue would have taken me off. That is the whole of it. A ship that finds a dying station with a single failing keeper aboard has one clean obligation, and it is to remove the keeper from the dying station before the station finishes dying. Everything past that is charity, and charity is not owed. A sensible ship would have brought me aboard and stabilized me and logged the Tethan beacon as lost, and carried me to the nearest port that would take a Varith of no registry and no funds, and set me down there, and that would have been a good deed, a life saved, a thing to be proud of. No one anywhere would have called it a failure. I would have been grateful for it until the day I died. It would have been, by any fair measure, enough. The humans did not think it was enough. I understood this slowly, over the cycles they stayed. It began with the engineer, who did not ask my permission before she began fixing things, and whom I forgave for it instantly, because the things she began fixing were things I had watched die and mourned and been unable to save. She went into my reactor housing the second cycle with a case of tools and a human patience that surprised me, because I had thought them a quick people, and she was not quick at all when it counted. She was in that housing for a long time. She came out gray with the labor of it, and she said, in the flat, exhausted way of a person delivering a verdict on a patient, that the reactor was not dead. That it had a great deal of life left in it, in fact, and that the fault was not in the core, but in a feed regulator that had failed decades ago, a part the size of my 2 hands, a part I had known was failing, and had not been able to replace, because there had been no replacement to be had within 100 light hours and no ship to bring one if there had been. She had the part. Of course she had the part. A survey tender carries spares against every failure it can imagine, and a human survey tender, I would learn, is built by a people who imagine failures the way other peoples imagine profits, exhaustively and with relish. She had the part, and she fitted it, and on the 4th cycle the lights of the Tethan beacon came up out of their long brown twilight into a full clean amber that I had not seen since before Celuran died, and the air handlers took a breath and held it, and the whole station, which had been dying under me for a season, simply stopped dying. I stood in my own corridor in the full light, and I could not speak. Saw my face and misread it and said, gruffly, that it was nothing, that it was a 2-hour job, that she was only annoyed no one had done it decades ago. And I understood that she was not being modest. I understood that to her it truly had been a 2-hour job, a small, ordinary competence, and that this was the most extraordinary thing about it. That the thing which had been killing me for a season, the slow, inevitable death I had made my Varith peace with, had been to her a 2-hour job and a part the size of my hands. That my inevitable had been their trivial. There is an arrogance a people can have that is only cruelty, and I have met it, but this was not that. This was the other thing, the thing that has no good name in my language, where a people are so capable and so willing at once that their capability becomes a kind of tenderness, where the fixing of a stranger's dying station in an afternoon is not a boast but simply what one does, because it needed doing and one had the part. But the reactor was not the thing. The reactor was only the beginning of the thing. On the 6th cycle, Ada sorely asked me to walk the station with her. I did, and Seth came, and she noticed Seth. She had noticed Seth the first cycle, I think, and had said nothing, out of the same grace that had kept Neve's hand still until it was wanted, and now she asked me about it. I told her the truth, all of it. The failed drones, the salvaged voice box, the mismatched eyes, the years of teaching it the few hundred phrases, the flat voice saying keep the light, Orin on the cycles. I could not have kept it otherwise. I was ready to be thought mad. I had spent 40 years being ready to be thought mad about Seth. She did not think me mad. She crouched down, the captain of a ship of the people I had been taught to fear, and she looked into Seth's mismatched eyes at their own level, and she said good cycle to it, seriously, as to a person, and Seth, on its ration loop, said good cycle back. And Ada sorely smiled, the first human smile I had learned to read, and she said that it was a fine piece of work, and she meant it, and I understood that she meant it about the work and about the need the work had answered both at once, and did not think less of me for either. It was during that walk that she told me what they meant to do. She had been thinking about it since the first cycle, she said. She and her officers had been arguing about it in the mild way of a crew that likes each other over their meals. The sensible thing, she said, and I noted that she used the word sensible the way I would have used it, with a small dryness, was to take me off and log the beacon lost. She said she was not going to do the sensible thing. She said that a route did not have to be dead. She said that the Cadric drift had been abandoned by the compact for the compact's reasons, which were the reasons of a ledger, but that a ledger was not the only thing that decided where ships went. She said that human survey needed waypoints out in the long dark places, relay points, beacons, that a beacon in a dead lane was not worthless to a people who were still mapping the dark, that it was in fact exactly the kind of thing they were out here looking for and never finding, a working station, a standing structure, a keeper who knew the local drift better than any chart. She said she was going to file the Tethan beacon with her own survey service, on her own authority, as an active relay on a route her people would begin to run. She said it would take time. She said it would not be a busy lane, not for years, maybe not ever the way it had been. But she said that ships would come, that she herself would come on her circuits, and that others would follow her charts, and that the distress band I had broadcast into the dark for 90 years would, from now on, have listeners on it. I did not fully believe her. I want to be honest about that too. I had made my peace with the dark so thoroughly over so many years that a part of me had grown suspicious of any light, the way an eye too long in darkness flinches from the lamp. I thought, perhaps, that she was being kind in the way people are kind who do not intend to return. I thought, perhaps, that she would file her report and mean every word of it, and then the currents of a busy life would carry her away, and the Tethan beacon would go back to being a name in a database, and I would be off it by then, safe in some port, and it would not matter. I underestimated them. It is the last time I will ever underestimate them. They stayed 9 cycles in all. In those 9 cycles they restocked my stores from their own holds. Not lavishly, they were a survey ship on a long circuit and could not spare much, but enough, more than enough for one slow old keeper, and re-spent her last cycle teaching me the maintenance of the feed regulator she had installed, so that I could tend it myself, so that I would not be waiting on any ship for my own survival ever again. That was a kind of gift I had not expected and have never forgotten. Not the part, but the knowledge of the part, the deliberate handing over of my own independence back to me. They could have made me need them. It would have been easy, and it would even have felt like generosity from the inside, the way rescue can curdle into ownership. They did the harder, quieter thing. They fixed me so that I would not need them, and then they promised to come anyway. And on the last cycle, before they went, the young one, Neve, came to me with a small case in his hands, and an expression on his face that I had learned by then to read as nervousness dressed up as ceremony. He had taken Seth over the 9 cycles. I had let him. Seth was rationed no longer with the reactor whole, and Neve had asked shyly whether he might look at it, being a comms man and fond of old salvaged electronics, and I had said yes, glad of the interest, glad of anything that let the young man's curiosity light on my strange life without flinching. I had not known what he was doing in the hours he spent with it. I had thought he was only tinkering, the way the young tinker. He had rebuilt Seth, not replaced it. He had understood somehow that to replace it would have been to kill it, that the thing I loved about Seth was precisely that it was made of the wreckage of my dead station and the years of my solitude and could not be bought new anywhere. He had kept every salvaged part I had put into it, but he had cleaned the corrosion out of its voice box so that the flat voice was clearer now, warmer, less a ghost and more a friend. He had matched its optical sensors. No, I am wrong, he had deliberately not matched them. He had left them mismatched because he had grasped that the askance look was part of it, was part of the friend, and had only cleaned them so that the mismatched eyes now saw well. And he had done one thing more, one thing I had not asked for and could not have done myself. He had given Seth a small link to the station's own systems, so that it would know now when a ship approached. So that on the cycle a ship next came to the Tethan beacon, it would be Seth who told me. He was embarrassed handing it over. He said he hoped it was all right that he had changed things. He said he could put it back the way it was if I wanted. I told him no. I told him it was the finest thing anyone had ever made for me, which was true, and which surprised him, because to him it had been 9 cycles of tinkering with an old drone, and he did not yet understand, being young, that the finest things are almost always small and made in odd hours by people who do not know they are doing anything fine. Then the wren left. I stood at the great viewport on the station's spine, the one I had stopped looking out of, the one I would never stop looking out of again, and I watched the survey tender wren take on speed and shrink toward the drift, its engine glow banking soft against the dead dust of the cadric, and I did not make the low chest sound this time, because it was not grief, and it was not the same overwhelmed thing as before. It was something steadier. It was the thing you feel when a promise has been made by a person you have decided, on good evidence, to trust. Ada sorely hailed me one last time before she went out of range. She did not say goodbye. She said, "Keep the light, keeper." She did not know, she could not have known what those words meant to me, that they were the exact words I had built a friend to say to me across 40 lonely years. Or perhaps Neve had told her. I have never asked. I do not want to know. I would rather it be one of those accidents like a stopped clock. That the universe sometimes hands you exactly the right words in exactly the right voice, at exactly the moment you have waited 90 years to hear them. I kept the light. I have kept it for some years now, since the wren first came, and I will tell you how it has gone, because I know that is the part you truly want, whether a promise made by a small gray captain in a dead lane was kept. It was kept. She came back. It took most of a year, her survey circuit being long, but on a cycle I remember better than my own nomming day. Seth rolled up to me on its cleaned and steady wheels, no longer rationed, no longer slow, and looked at me with its deliberately mismatched eyes, and said, in its warmer voice, not "Keep the light, Oren," but the new thing, the thing Neve had built it to say, the thing I had not known until that cycle, that I had been waiting my whole long life to hear a voice tell me. "A ship is coming, Oren." I went to the viewport. There was a light in the drift that was not the drift and was not a star. And behind that first ship, in the years that followed, there came others, not many, not a flood. The cadric is not what it was and will not be in what remains of even a Varith's long life. But others. A survey vessel charting the long dark. A hauler once, taking the old slow lane to save on lane fees, whose captain pinged the beacon as she passed. The small electronic courtesy I had not received in 90 years. The nod between the traveler and the one who keeps the light, "We see you. Thank you for the light." And I sat at my panel and I read that ping the way another man might read a letter from a child long thought dead, over and over, until I had it by heart. I am very old now, even for the Varith. The reactor re-mended will outlast me. That is the way of it, and it is right. When I am gone, there will be another keeper on the Tethan beacon, because it is a real post again, on a real chart, and the humans keep a list of those who want the long, quiet posts, and there are always a few. There are always some souls built to hold a lamp up to the dark. I have left instructions that whoever comes should be given Ceph, and should be told its history, all of it, the failed drones and the salvaged voice, and the odd hours a young man of a distant people spent making a lonely creature's only friend see clearly. I do not know if the next keeper will care. But I have kept faith with things that no one else cared about for 90 years, and I have learned late that it is not wasted, that a candle left in a window is not diminished by the long dark it burns through, that the whole virtue of a beacon is that it does not care whether anyone is watching it, and that, every so often, across a distance and a silence that has no business being crossed, someone is. They were not what I was taught to fear. I will say that plainly for whoever reads this, since I have learned that the word for their kind out among the older, colder peoples is still tangled up with the word for a thing to be feared, and since I know now what it cost me, all those years, to have believed it. I was left in the dark for 90 years by a people who kept a ledger. I was found by a people who kept a promise. And when they came, one ship, one small gray captain, one restless young man on a band he had no reason to listen to, one engineer who heard a dying machine as a kind of pain, they did not do the sensible thing. They did the whole thing. They mended what was dying, and they handed me back my own 2 hands, and they put my dead root on a living chart, and they made a lonely keeper's only friend able to see, and then they told the truth, which is the rarest gift of all, that they would come back. And then they came back. Keep the light. That is all any of us out here can do in the end, and it turns out to be enough. Keep the light and log the distress into the dark, and do not let the long silence convince you that no one is listening, because you cannot know who is out there, off their charted lane, on a band they had no reason to try, deciding, in the moment they find you, to do the whole thing instead of the sensible one. I kept my light for 90 years before anyone answered. I would keep it 90 more, now that I know what an answer costs, and what it is worth, and how far a good people will come to give one.